On behalf of Westminster College and the National Churchill Museum, I declare this, the 36th Annual R. Crosby Kemper Lecture, open. Please silence all cell phones. Skulls and Marshals, please withdraw. Please remove your hats. And I would like to introduce the chaplain resident of Westminster College, Logan John, for the invocation.
Please join me in prayer. O Spirit of perennial wisdom, first light, breath of all things, once more we ask you, make your presence known. For once again, these fellows are gathering and peer with clear eyes like crystalline Christopher Wren windows, not turning our vision to an empty visage of convenient privilege, but gazing with open hearts at the shadows looming. The clouds of war, pandemic, poverty, and death. Let this convening of our Churchill Fellows be busy with that work which Tolstoy called the business of all humanity, to seek out and save in the soul that which is perishing. In that spirit, may this Kemper Lecture be covered in the eternal light, which is not so dimly lit by Gazprom gasoline, but kept bright by our renewed commitment to understanding, development, and engagement in our communities and across the globe. Gratefully gathered, we give thanks by saying, Amen.
You may be seated. Good morning, and welcome to America's National Churchill Museum at Westminster College. My name is Tim Riley. I'm the Director and Chief Curator here, and on behalf of the Association of Churchill Fellows of Westminster College, it's very pleased to have you here in this wonderful space, this hallowed space, this morning. We gather today in a time of turmoil. We gather today when there are talk of Iron Curtains, 76 years after Winston Churchill made the phrase popular here at Westminster College. We gather here today to ask the question, how do we preserve the peace? How do we combat tyranny? One of the two marauders that Churchill defined in his Iron Curtain speech on March 5th, 1946, here at Westminster College. We do so in time-honored tradition in this magnificent space. Sir Christopher Wren's St. Mary the Virgin, Aldermanbury, itself a reminder of perseverance and resilience. These stones have seen countless wars, countless plagues in their nearly 750-year history. For the past 50 years or so, the Association of Churchill Fellows has gathered here at Westminster College to celebrate Winston Churchill's legacy and the legacy and reverberation of the Iron Curtain speech, first gave in our gymnasium. Today is no different. And today we welcome into the hallowed group of honorary Churchill Fellows of Westminster College 4 new inductees. We'd like to have a brief ceremony to award those inductees into the Association of Churchill Fellows before today's Kemper Lecture. So I invite our senior fellow, Philip Beckman, to stand, as well as our 4 honorees for this year's class. Please. I'll let you get the fellow medals. You'll notice the fellows in the crowd are bedecked in their red medallions and we have a privilege of issuing new ones each year. This one, for the first time in person, for a number of years. So we're very, very happy to see so many people in the crowd. Our first fellow for the class of 2022 is Katherine Carter. Katherine Carter is the curator at Chartwell, the home of Winston and Clementine Churchill in Kent, England. Those of us who carry the title Curator and Churchill together in their business cards are a rare breed, so I'm very happy that Katherine is here and going to be in the Churchill Fellows. The second inductee is Garry Kasparov, who needs no introduction, though Crosby Kemper will do a fine one in just a few moments. Our third inductee today is Susan Lane Piper, who recalled that she first visited this place in 1973, and even before that, at the tender age of 3, learned how to read by reading Winston Churchill. We're happy to have Susan Lane Piper back here, who together with her husband Bill, also a fellow, have been exceedingly generous in the preservation campaign to make sure this facility remains vibrant well into the future. And our fourth inductee this morning is Westminster College President and alumnus Donald P. Lofe, Jr. Don Lofe has been a longtime supporter of Winston Churchill. He values this museum and its place within the liberal arts curriculum here at Westminster College. He has been as supportive, or more so, than nearly any other president in Westminster College's history, and has helped lead the campaign to raise funds, to raise the profile, and most importantly, to really integrate the curriculum into the curriculum, this place, and its purpose. So we're very happy to have Westminster College President Don Lofe also the fellow. So I'd ask Philip, please, to ceremonially issue the medallion. Congratulations all.
Mr. President, Senior Fellow Beckman, Director Riley, Dr. Jones, members of the Churchill family, and fellow fellows, or former fellow fellows and future fellow fellows. I'm in the federal government now, so some things I can't do that I want to do. March 12th, 1999, 23 years ago, just down the road, the Truman Presidential Library, a remarkable and moving ceremony. Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic, represented by their foreign ministers, signed documents joining them to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, to NATO. Almost exactly 50 years after Harry Truman and Dean Acheson signed the documents that made the United States a part of NATO and made NATO a reality. The extraordinary thing that happened that day was that the foreign minister of Poland said, "We have joined the West." And by that, he did not mean simply the NATO alliance. He did not mean simply what we sometimes too frequently derogate as Western civilization. He meant civilization generally, as we would define it today, as Churchill would define it in opposition to barbarism. Earlier this year, the United States Senate voted 99-1, interesting who the one was, to accept the accession of Sweden and Finland to NATO, an important and powerful response to Russia's aggression in Ukraine and the endless threats of Vladimir Putin to every nation on Russia's borders. Garry Kasparov, in his book, Winter is Coming, published in 2015, talks about Ronald Reagan's great speech, A Time for Choosing. In times like these, we all make choices that morally and ethically define us. The Poles and the Czechs and the Hungarians did that. This year, the Swedes and the Finns did that. As Garry Kasparov says in Winter is Coming, we must relearn the lessons of the Cold War. It's hard to believe that we have to do that. It's hard to believe sitting here in St. Mary Aldermanbury and honoring Winston Churchill as we do, that we have forgotten the lessons of the Cold War. But as Garry Kasparov says in Winter is Coming, evil does not die, history does not end. I was rereading the book yesterday and remembering the two previous moments I had the honor of introducing Mr. Kasparov. The first time was at the Kansas City Public Library quite a few years ago, and he was verbally assaulted, an attempt to shout him down by various Putinistas and assorted people so far to the left they were falling off the edge. But he was completely unperturbed and civilly but forcefully met and mastered those folks who wanted to stop his speech. The second time was on the publication of Winter is Coming, where he talks about, it's really extraordinary to read it now, 7 years later, he talks about Vladimir Putin's last invasion of Ukraine, where, of course, as you know, he took the Crimea illegally. And to objections from the West, but not very strong objections, no lines in the sand. He said in the book, if we do not confront Vladimir Putin, if we do not heed the lessons of the Cold War, Vladimir Putin will escalate. We didn't, and he did, as we know today. Garry Kasparov is the greatest chess player of his generation, one of the greatest of all time. He's mentored young players and prodigies around the world, written many books on chess. He has helped make St. Louis, the capital of chess in the United States, working with his friend and mine, Rex Sinquefield, maybe the center of chess in the world. But the most important thing that he has done in the 20 years since he retired from chess, from competitive chess, is as a leader of the Russian opposition to the bloody imperial autocracy of Vladimir Putin. He has done this with his friend and colleague Boris Nemtsov, who was assassinated, with his colleague Alex Navalny, who is today in jail for 10 years or however long Vladimir Putin chooses to keep him there. And with the knowledge that every time he appears in public, his life is at risk. Even walking the streets of Manhattan is an act of courage, an act of choosing. Today in Fulton at St. Mary Aldermanbury, restored from Hitler's bombs, perhaps we have in our presence the spirit of Harry Truman, of Ronald Reagan, and Winston Churchill. Ladies and gentlemen, we have Garry Kasparov.
Thank you for that gracious introduction, Director Kemper. And thank you for all your work in the causes of freedom and knowledge, which must always go together. I'm thrilled to be here to speak in Fulton again. My thanks to Director Tim Riley and his team at the Churchill Museum for making it possible. It's a great honor to deliver the 36th Enid and R. Crosby Kemper Lecture, and to follow very literally in the footsteps of two of my heroes, Harry Truman and Winston Churchill. It's also special to be here on this hallowed ground with so many friends from whom I've learned so much. Among them are some of my living heroes, people with the courage and conviction that was rare in the day of Churchill and is rare still today. Masih Alinejad, the founder of the women-led movement currently sweeping Iran. If only Russian men were as brave as Iranian women. Leopoldo Lopez of Venezuela, who lost his freedom for so long and is dedicated to bringing it not just to his people, but to all. Abdulaziz Al-Hamza of Syria, where Putin practiced his genocide techniques with his dictator colleague, Bashar al-Assad. And uniting them and so many others, Thor Halvorsen, founder and CEO of the Human Rights Foundation. Thank you all for being here and for everything you do to inspire me and all of us. And my special thanks to my truest inspiration, my bravest, most valuable ally through it all, my wife Dasha. My lecture today is titled simply, A New Sinews of Peace. Not very original, I admit, but the threats we face and the answers we seek today are not original either. Today, there is once again war in Europe with a dictator determined to change Europe's borders by force. Today, it is again necessary to unite the forces of freedom to create a new grand alliance. But unlike at the time of the 1946 original Sinews speech, today there is a clear and present danger. The good news is that I no longer have to convince anyone of the dangers Vladimir Putin represents, as I did or tried to do 21 long years ago, soon after he took power in Russia, and again in 2008 when he invaded the Republic of Georgia, and in 2014 when he first invaded Ukraine, and every day since then. The threat has been realized. Winter is no longer coming, as I titled my 2015 book. It's a fine fall day here in Fulton, Missouri, but make no mistake, winter is here. And it is still unclear if the free world is willing and able to meet this challenge. We could do worse than to read and reread Sir Winston's original speech delivered on March 5th, 1946. It is remembered as the Iron Curtain speech for its prescience and warning against the rise of communist totalitarianism from Stalin's Soviet Union. That sounded strange to many ears at the time, since Stalin and the USSR had so recently been American allies against the Axis powers. Of course, American allies only after Stalin first allied with Hitler to divide Eastern Europe in 1939. That inconvenient fact is illegal to point out in Putin's Russia, by the way. Churchill's speech was far more than a warning, and in this I hope to emulate him as well. He spoke about preserving and lifting up the ideals and methods that worked to advance modern civilization, the values of democracy and freedom, of the need for action, not only words. His goal was not small, not selfish. He dreamed of safety for, quote, all the homes and families of all the men and women in all the lands, from what he called the twin marauders, war and tyranny. In 1946, the war was over, and the menace of tyranny was not yet clear. Yet, Churchill saw the need to build new defenses with no time to lose. What he lacked was the ability to build them. And that is where, once again, America came in. The United States would again become the arsenal of democracy, in Franklin Roosevelt's famous phrase. More than weapons this time, the alliance would also build institutions to keep the balance of power. Speed was crucial, as it was just 3 years later when Soviets performed their first nuclear test in August 1949. Churchill knew that the United Nations would not be enough, even with American participation. Diplomats and courts needed sheriffs and constables, in his words. I hate to skip so much important material, but let us just say that with the many painful bumps and bruises, it worked, at least for a while. Nuclear catastrophe was averted by the principle of stalemate. Soviet expansion was contained by NATO. The United Nations served a purpose as a shock absorber, where the superpowers could yell and wrangle without making real war. The status quo allowed the free world to flourish in relative safety, even if those of us living behind the Iron Curtain enjoyed none of those benefits. It wasn't until 1989, 2 generations removed from Churchill's speech here in Fulton, that the rusty wall cracked and finally collapsed with the USSR itself on December 25th, 1991. It was a glorious day, a day of celebration, and a huge step forward for global freedom. The problem was the next day and the next. The Cold War was over. The Soviet Union was over. But history was not over. Where were our Trumans and Churchills, ready to step forward with bold new plans for the collapsing world order? Where were the strategic thinkers and the visionaries creating new institutions to cement the advantages of the free world and to spread its benefits further to every corner of the globe? The United Nations, robbed of its purpose of freezing hostilities between the US and the USSR, has become a platform of dictators. Not merely obsolete, not merely a phrasing of words in Churchill's memorable phrase, but actively harmful to the cause of freedom and human rights. Iran sits on the UN Commission for Women. Venezuela is on the UN Human Rights Council, as was Russia until removed this April. And Russia still enjoys veto rights over all decisions of this organization. Unfortunately, unlike in 1946, in 1991, instead of leaders, we had managers. Instead of looking to the future, they celebrated the present, praising themselves. Instead of investing the peace dividend in a new league of democracies, the old bureaucracies and tyrannies were allowed to fester like weeds that had been cut back but not uprooted. I have a consistent record of criticizing politicians of every stripe and party. I have called out 6 consecutive US presidents for their policies, occasionally in person, for their unwillingness to learn from their great predecessors. An America that does not defend liberty everywhere will see its decay at home as well, a process that is already underway. We are paying the price for our apathy. Ukraine is paying the price in blood. The war in Ukraine did not begin on February 24 of this year, not even on February 20, 2014, when Russia invaded and annexed Crimea. This war is decades in the making. 30 years of making concessions that were intended to keep the peace, but only postpone the war. 20 years of pretending it was possible to separate business and politics, a fallacy that dictators like Putin never believed in themselves. And it was 8 years of refusing to stand up to Putin in Ukraine, fearing escalation, which only guaranteed greater risks later when Putin inevitably escalated on his terms. We were told by the great democratic powers that it was too risky, too expensive to help Ukraine in 2014. Well, the cost of this new war is already estimated at nearly $3 trillion, as food and fuel crises create shocks around the world. Putin has already used energy supplies for blackmail, and you might have heard, winter is coming. In the 1930s, the appeasement mantra was peace at any cost. It was a brutal lesson to learn how high that cost could be. The modern appeasers said it was business at any cost, that economic engagement with authoritarian regimes would liberalize them, spread Western values, tie their success to ours. It failed. It failed completely. The dictators engaged. That much is true. Then they took the free world's billions and trillions and invested it in military spending and greater repression at home. They used the political capital from summits and meetings with free world leaders to crush domestic opposition. They used the pipelines and energy deals for blackmail, recently adding food supplies to this mafia extortion plan. I would very much like to hear from Chancellor Merkel and President Obama what they think of their legacies in this department. For so many years, we in the Russian opposition said that Putin was a Russian problem for Russians to deal with, but that with foreign money and political support, he would inescapably become everyone's problem. And here we are. There was an exchange of political benefits and practices. But instead of liberal democracy and the rule of law flowing to the authoritarian regimes, their corruption and despotism flooded the free world. Cash, propaganda, and fraud have become the biggest exports of the unfree world, not oil and gas, not manufacturing. Oligarchs, directly and indirectly tied to the world's worst regimes, buy Western companies, sport teams, entertainment stars, politicians, make donations to think tanks and universities, all tied to the power structure. Putin's war has raised awareness of these hidden threats. But fighting corruption on the political and financial battlefield will be as difficult as the war on the ground. We have the resources to fight and to win. And thanks to the brave people and leaders of Ukraine, we now have the spirit to fight. Ukrainians have reminded us of what it looks like to sacrifice for your land, your family, your freedom. This was by no means a certainty. The US and NATO nations were not expecting Ukraine to survive more than a few days. But from most unexpected quarter came a hero. Facing Putin's blitzkrieg, President Volodymyr Zelensky, a former comedian, matched Churchill's stirring, "We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be," to Parliament on June 4, 1940. When President Biden offered to evacuate Zelensky and the Ukrainian leadership, the immortal reply came quickly: "I don't need a right, I need ammunition." And now, finally, years too late, he has ammunition. America is once again becoming the arsenal of democracy. Sleepy Europe is finally awake to the wolf, or Russian bear, at its door. Here I must not make the mistake of counting all of Europe as one bloc. Ukraine's neighbors, or better put, Russia's neighbors, have known the dangers all along. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, they never doubted that Putin would continue his offensive if undeterred. Meanwhile, the most powerful coalition in history, military coalition in history, NATO, and many of the largest economies in the world still thought they would be able to do business with the mafia dictator in the Kremlin. This is why helping Ukraine has never been charity. It is a debt. Putin built his police state and his war machine with European money, even some American money. Ukraine is not a buffer state, as some cynical geopolitical strategists would make it. It is a sovereign nation. It has also become a shield, the front line in Putin's much larger war against the modern world order. Is it expensive? Yes. As I wrote so many years ago, the price of stopping a dictator always goes up. It may seem expensive today, but it's only going to be more tomorrow. And who are we to complain about the price of gas when Ukrainians are paying in blood for our sins? We are the ones who have the ability to stop Putin in his tracks, and we choose not to. We chose to believe Putin would go away if we made enough concessions. We chose to pass the buck, as Truman never did, to the next administration, avoiding the hard decisions. But dictators must always escalate, and so the time of hard decisions has come. The brave people of Ukraine are fighting like hell and dying to remind us not to take liberty for granted. Putin, like every dictator before him, underestimated the will of free people. Ukrainians are fighting for all of us, and they deserve nothing less than every resource, every weapon they need to win, for Ukraine to be whole and free. The weapons are coming, and Ukraine is winning. It's still not enough, still not fast enough, but Ukraine is winning the war. Putin's mobilization is best met by mobilizing the overwhelmingly superior forces of the free world to end this war quickly. We must stay focused and united on what victory means. It means restoring 100% of Ukrainian territory to Ukrainian control. It means accountability for the destruction and war crimes Russia has inflicted, from tribunals to reparations. If Russia is ever to join the family of civilized nations, It must be free of Putin's mafia and cured of the imperialism virus that for centuries has caused so much damage to Russia's neighbors and to Russia itself. It's a long road and a hard road, but we must, as Churchill said, have an all-over strategic concept. This is not chess, but we must look more than a few moves ahead. Our strategy must go beyond Ukraine, beyond Russia, and to building a secure and free world. It must be based on values, the values of human life and human freedom. In 1946, Churchill didn't have to remind his audience what that meant. They had lived through the most horrible war against true evil. No one could doubt that evil existed or that it had to be fought. Now we're seeing images from Ukraine that remind us of true evil, of civilians slaughtered on a madman's whim. We said never again, and we cannot let those words ring hollow. We've seen evil, that is clear. But what of good? How do we define these precious values when there is so much disagreement among us? In fact, disagreement is what defines free societies and democracies. Free elections, free choices, free people. It's tyranny, dictatorship that says there can be no disagreement. So while we will not agree on everything, what we must do is put aside our differences and unite when true evil threatens. My work in recent years has been focused through the Human Rights Foundation and more domestically, the Renewed Democracy Initiative. Never would I have imagined just a decade ago that my fight for democracy would expand from Russia to the United States. But that is the situation, as the institutions that guarantee our rights are coming under attack. It turned out that many of the laws and norms we took for granted here were based on the honor system, that they were easily targeted and subverted by those who seek only power. Such people are thriving on every side of the political spectrum and on every side of the world today. To Americans and most Europeans, such forces are relatively new or have previously been fringe or regional threats. No more. Today, the radicals are advancing, and to fight them, you must learn from those who have experience. I mentioned at the start that a few dissident heroes in a global army fighting for freedom are here today. They are living examples of how those fighting against dictatorship can unite, just as dictators do. They are also a refutation of the old saying, never meet your heroes. It's wonderful to meet your heroes if you can also work with them, discuss ideas with them, and go into battle with them. Much like Ukraine, these voices of conscience, these freedom fighters from all over the world, they are not here to learn from the free world or to seek charity. They are here to teach us and to give us the gift of their moral clarity and their courage. Today, these students must be the nations and people whom Churchill urged to unite in 1946. He repeatedly mentioned the English-speaking world, appropriate for an Englishman speaking in America. But I'm a Russian speaker and a Soviet-born Armenian Jew from Baku, no less, here to say that America must still lead. And you can. But first you must learn and relearn these most important lessons. Sir Winston would be quite surprised to hear his sentiments so boldly echoed by representatives of Iran, Syria, Venezuela, and God save the king, even Russia. But I'm sure he would appreciate their courage all the more for their not having been born to freedom and prosperity. he would understand that 76 years after his speech, the fires of freedom had dimmed in its traditional homes and required new ignition, new fuel. These values, these people, these movements, they are the new sinews of peace. Unlike in 1946, the free world has overwhelming advantages economically, militarily, and culturally. The world is connected in countless ways previously unimagined. We have the ability to spread the light of liberty into every corner of the globe, to illuminate the darkest prisons. But will we? That is what I ask. Will we do what Truman and Churchill did? Will we build what needs to be built and fight the battles that must be won? Or will we allow domestic partisanship and fear of risk doom us to decline and fall? Opportunity is here now, clear and shining, as Churchill said. We must grasp this opportunity together. An event like this always evokes memories and anniversaries, but there is one today you might have missed. Today, October 7th, is the 70th birthday of Vladimir Putin. Yes, somewhere in Russia, deep in a bunker, the little dictator is celebrating what has become the most dangerous, difficult year of his life. The walls are closing in, and like every dictator, he fears his own people more than anything. I bet he would not even allow there to be a knife in the room to cut the cake. We can all agree that 70 is an ideal age for Putin to retire. I don't think there are many places that will welcome him at this point. I doubt that the detention center in The Hague is up to the standards of his palaces. But it may be the safest place for him soon enough. Being put on a trial for war crimes is preferable to being stabbed in the back or dragged through the streets. If this sounds too optimistic, I'll repeat what I said in 2010 when I was asked by a reporter when Putin will leave office. The bad news is that I don't know, I said. But the good news is neither does he. As my dissident colleagues here understand, the work of fighting against dictatorship is like that of stonemason. It is not the last blow that cracks the mighty boulder, but the thousands of blows that came before when there was no visible change. And so we must keep hammering. The ripples of Putin's failure are already spreading. The winds of freedom are blowing from Ukraine to uprisings in Iran and Dagestan and beyond. If Putin can be defeated by Ukraine, no dictator is invincible. For decades, Putin has been the spider in the center of the global web of tyranny, propping up murderous regimes all over the world. China's threat is growing, and it is a much more formidable adversary in many ways. But the Chinese leadership is also watching very carefully what happens in Ukraine and Russia. Taiwan is also watching, and both Koreas. Will Putin's nuclear blackmail be allowed to work, leading to rapid nuclear proliferation? Or will the world democracies find the strength to finally squash the spider and send a message to all world dictators and would-be dictators? Ukraine is showing us the way. The dissidents and oppressed people of the world, from Uyghurs in Xinjiang to the women in the streets of Tehran, they are showing us the way. They are reminding us that freedom is worth fighting for, that it must be fought for, or it will be lost. We must help them, yes, but it's also they who are helping us. We see their bravery and sacrifice, and we see that we too must be brave and sacrifice for the rights we treasure. And how easy we have it in comparison. We do not risk being jailed for wanting to vote. We will not be beaten for holding up a sign or for simply saying a forbidden word like war. Let those fighting and dying for the rights we take for granted not sacrifice in vain. Let them inspire us to do what we can and to do what we must. We can speak, and so we must speak. We can act, and so we must act. When we do, when we accept this great challenge, the hollow halls of dictatorship will tremble. So let us raise our voices. Let us unite. Let us share our wisdom, our love, and our courage. Thank you.
We do have some time for a few questions. We do have a microphone in the center of the aisle. I would ask that if you have a question, please line up, and I know you'll answer wisely.
What does it mean? I'm not a politician running for an office. I don't waffle. Yes, I don't duck. So be aware of the question you ask because you'll get the most straightforward answer. The question is, it's easy for me to repeat because this is typically the first question that I always being asked. Actually, it's a first second, One is, could Putin be replaced by somebody who's worse and more aggressive? Second is, what about nukes? So I'm sure there will be a second question here as well. So is it's the, ask Ukrainians what could be worse. So I think this is kind of a fallacy that ignores historical lessons. Could be anyone worse than Hitler? Anybody worse than Stalin? Putin is the worst, and I'm not here just to analyze, the slight differences among his entourage. They're all war criminals. And if Putin goes down, that's not because he's replaced by somebody worse, because he'll go down because he's losing the war. There's only one way to topple dictatorship like Putin's. To win the war. Military and geopolitical defeat was and still is the only way to bring them down. And losing the war means that others, whoever could be around, they will have to look for the way out. Which means trying to go back to Europe. Objectively, the Russia's future has only two. It's a road, that's it, a nexus and two alternatives. Either Russia becomes Chinese satellite, or tries to get back to Europe. I don't know if it's doable or not. What I believe is that it will take years, if not decades, for us to reconcile with Ukrainians. I have nearly impeccable record fighting Putin's regime for 20 plus years. I'm still Russian. And every morning I wake up, look at my wife, she looks at me, and we feel ashamed. for what's being done in Ukraine. We know today what great Germans like Marlene Dietrich or Thomas Mann felt back in 1940. They were against Adolf Hitler, but they were still Germans. And we will do our utmost to close this gap and just to exonerate the owner of our country, or what will be left of our country. I just briefly mentioned in my presentation, the future of Russia, if there is a future of Russia, should be not an imperial one. The imperial virus must be eradicated from the body of Russian statehood. Again, is it doable? I don't know. But Russia must cease to be an empire. 21st century, that's it. There's no room for empires. And people like myself helping Ukraine, raising funds and rallying support, we all believe that this war must be the last war of Russian empire. And I think that the moment Putin goes down, and it may be sooner than many people think, will offer us an opportunity, a window of opportunity, maybe very narrow. And it will be a tragedy for us not to take this historical chance. A question there.
You mentioned Iran, Venezuela, Syria, but we don't have institutions like NATO in those areas. What institutions or what framework do you think we need to look at some of these tyrannies that are outside of Europe?
As I called Putin in my presentation, a spider in the center of this web of tyrannies, it's probably an answer to the question. Because the dictators, even if they're not connected directly, though they're working together very closely. As of yesterday, 86 Iranian drones have attacked Ukrainian soil. 86. 60% of them have been shot down by Ukrainian forces, but 40% caused this huge damage, killed people. So we know that in Venezuela, there is a clear presence on the ground by Russians and Iranians. So without Putin, without a big boss in Moscow, I think many of this regime will simply collapse. You remember the wind of change that was blowing in 1991 with the collapse of the Soviet Union. Now it could be even worse. I don't think Bashar al-Assad can survive without Putin. I don't think Maduro will survive without Putin. And we're already seeing, even before Putin collapsed, we're already seeing a pre-revolution in Iran. But I think it's somehow in the world that is so intertwined, there's a kind of spirit that travels around. And the heroic resistance of Ukrainians and them winning the war, that's the best weapon. We don't need NATO in Latin America. I think the smell of victory, of freedom in Eastern Europe could energize freedom fighters around the world. Again, there's nothing is certain, but I believe that without removing Putin and changing Russia, we will not have any results, even if we have other organizations built in various corners of the world. So that's why we just have to concentrate on what is most important. Ukraine today is on the front line of never-ending battle between freedom and tyranny. And Ukrainian victory means victory for every freedom fighter around the globe. Thank you. Masi, how could I ignore your question? It's a never-ending debate, about the freedom of expression, and I find it absolutely unacceptable that tech companies still keep dictators around the world on their platforms, as if they do not violate the norms of community. Oh, of course, they don't insult anybody verbally, they simply kill people. That's probably not a violation because it's not mentioned in the agreement that you sign. I believe, that's a part of our work here. Because these tech companies, they don't exist, in a vacuum. They don't have their office in Mars yet or elsewhere. They are in this country. And so much can be done just, to point out that they cannot no longer enjoy the benefits of being American corporations and serve interests of most vicious dictatorships around the world.
How long do you think China will support Putin so that he remains in power?
That's a question about China supporting Putin and for how long will it last. As a matter of fact, China doesn't support Putin as we speak. It's quite an interesting development, and that was another big strategic blunder of Vladimir Putin, who expected many dictators around the world to rally behind him. And I'm sure they would if he would be winning. But dictators, give them credit, they hate losers. And Putin is definitely not winning. And if in the beginning they were expecting Putin to enter Kiev, by the way, not only them, Americans, Europeans, all thought that Kiev would fall in 4 days. It didn't. And now Putin is isolated. It's an isolation of Russia I've never seen before. Buying Russian oil at 40% discount, be my guest. Offering any real help, And we could see not only China, but Kazakhstan. It's one of the biggest states in the Central Asia, actually the biggest one in Central Asia, where a local dictator, Mr. Tokayev, was saved by Putin's intervention January this year, when Russian troops came in, and stopped the uprising and preserved Tokayev's power. Now again, thank you very much, water under the bridge, next time. So Kazakhstan imposed very strict rules on following the sanctions. So we have a unique chance, not just beating Putin, but not only liberating Ukraine, but also creating a new geopolitical realities. And hopefully, we will take into account the lessons of 1991, that where we violated one of the most important rules of the game of chess, or any other game. You have an initiative, you have to press. If you don't press, the initiative goes to the other side. So I think that now it's time for us to work on a plan. And that's why I mentioned the United Nations, to come up with ideas like League of Democracy, promoted by late Senator John McCain, and offer the vision. Because there's no vacuum in the world politics. If we don't get in, somebody else does. And we know who. We leave Afghanistan, Taliban gets in. We leave Middle East, you have all sorts of terrorists and dictators, immediately filling the vacuum. So the reason China is quiet now, it's not just, upcoming quote-unquote elections of their leader, we know the outcome. But I think they all now have to measure their actions. I bet you, had, God forbid, Putin succeeded in taking over Kiev, China would be already preparing Taiwan invasion. But now, the balance of power has shifted in their favor, and it seems that they are no longer willing to escalate there. Yes, please.
Do you think there are enough people in the publics of the Western democracies who actually still believe in liberty sufficiently to provide the kind of leadership and unity that you think is necessary?
I'm an incorrigible optimist by nature. And while I mentioned challenges for democracy in this great country and in many European democracies, I still think that there is the very powerful coalition to be built and can be built to fight back against radical push from the right or the left. It's probably not easy because I think people are complacent. We definitely lost our vigilance. Somehow the end of the Cold War had a negative effect because we didn't have the enemy to be united against. But it's now probably time to unite on a positive program. So what's coming next? There's so many great things can be done. There's so many challenges that we can meet together. And again, it's always a tragic repetition, but when we have so many problems in the world, they're always resolved through the war. I think Ukrainian war is a turning point in history. And I don't think that any decent person can stay complacent watching the tragedy of Ukraine, but also the heroism of Ukraine. Probably it will be called miracle, as it was a miracle in 1940 when Britain stood alone against Nazi Germany. There were the same expectations that London would be taken over in a few days. After Luftwaffe would bomb it to the ground and then the Germans troops would land. So somehow democracy always finds its way. But democracy is a word, but it's us. So that's why I always appeal to people. And I think that we owe this to those who sacrifice their lives to remind us about the values that is worth fighting for and dying for. Oh, wow, many hands. But it was, I think life is there. So, and of course it's recorded. So we have nothing to hide. Yes, yeah. This is so. Oh, it will be but I don't know. It will be all over the place. You can of course visit, Kasparov.com if you want. You can, yes. We will not let you forget it. Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Skulls and Marshals and Professor Allen, if you'll please come forward. The audience is invited to join members of the Platform Party and new fellows to follow outside to the breakthrough sculpture, which is directly adjacent the museum in Latshaw Plaza. Edwina Sands, the artist, Churchill Fellow, and granddaughter of Clementine and Winston Churchill, will lead all those in procession through the monument, which is a powerful and enduring symbol of freedom, hope, and peace. I now declare this, the 36th Enid and R. Crosby Kemper Lecture, closed. Please remain seated until the Platform Party has left the church.